Okay, well, we're a couple of minutes past the hour now. I think there's still one or two people coming in, but we'll look to make a start. So as I say, very warm welcome to everybody who's joined us since I initially welcomed you. This is a follow-on to the previous competency management webinar that we ran a couple of weeks ago. So I know there's a number of people who attended that webinar who are here as well. So welcome back. And to those people who are joining us for the first time or the first competency management webinar, a very warm welcome. I'll hand over the mic very soon to get into the detail of what we want to talk about today, and not listening to my preamble for very long. But just a quick one in terms of what to expect today. So we'll be taking a look at what competency management is, the reasons, sort of key reasons to implement it, why it matters, what the data shows, the significant sort of improvements you can expect to see, the benefits of a digital CMS, a look at our competency management system, and we'll also be discussing available standards as well. We have an hour scheduled for the session. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat box or the Q&A box at the side, and we'll look to answer those at the end of the session. We'll answer as many as possible. If there's any we don't get to, then we will contact you afterwards for a follow-up. So without any further ado, I'd just like to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Raul Harris, our Chief Creative Officer here at Ocean Technologies Group. And we have Nikolai, Training Manager here at Ocean Technologies Group, and Andrew Easdown, a maritime consultant with a background and breadth of experience that is, well, I'm not sure unmatched, but very
tough to beat.
Yeah, exactly. Huge amount of experience and expertise. So when Andy speaks, he's well worth listening to, that's for sure. So I'll hand over to Raul, who I think is going to kick us off with the content of today.
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, and as you said, this is sort of the popular sequel, hopefully the better than the original of the competency management. The last time was really just talking about the conceptual ideas of competency management. We'll touch on that as a little bit of background, but today's session is a much more specific session designed to actually say, what is an actual competency management system, a digital competency management system? How does that work? And what do you need to think about when you're putting something like that together? It's going to be pretty much a conversation between us, really. And obviously, if you chime in with comments and questions, you'll be joining in as well. But it's pretty informal. The idea is just to touch on the main things you need to think about and the main areas that we go through. So, I mean, the first thing, just to understand what we mean by competence and why it's sort of different, say, from just a sort of approach to learning or whatever like that. And Andy, I'll call on you here. This is the common definition of competence. Have you got anything to kind of add to give us a bit of color on this one?
Yeah, it's been around a long time. Something that people have, if you like, understood for many years now, that to really gauge people's performance and their competence, you need to have some kind of system. And if you think about it, you look at somebody almost intuitively, whether they are competent or not. When they start to do something, when they demonstrate their skills to you, you start to see, oh yes, you think this is a competent person, but so you're intuitively doing that. But a competency management system actually helps you to objectively understand that. And that's really the key, which is against this commonly defined standards or criteria. So where you actually have evaluation criteria, because otherwise what happens is it becomes a very personal and subjective decision by somebody. Yeah. So it's very important that the criteria that you have, the way that you evaluate the individual is consistent. And that way you'll begin to understand across your fleet, if you like, not just on one ship, but across your fleet, the capabilities that you have. Yeah. And so it's very, very important both that the, if you like, the guidelines are consistent and the way that you evaluate are consistent. The key to that is actually that you're assessed consistently. And that's really where, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, you need to make sure that the people doing the assessment have also received training and understand the way that system works, so that they make consistent decisions as they evaluate various people when they're looking at the competency standard.
Yeah, and that's what really makes it a system, isn't it? Really, that you've got something which is systemic and you're employing everywhere. I think as well, when we look at this, like a lot of e-learning systems would be focused on knowledge, like imparting knowledge. Yeah. That's very important. We need to give people knowledge, but competency management systems are a way, I always think, about tying a whole bunch of different things together. You know, attitude and skill, actually demonstrating real world tasks. You don't have to, but it certainly gives you the opportunity to do that. And I think you'll see that when we go through this today. We'll come back to some of those themes that Andy was talking about there. So the next thing really is, why do companies go to this trouble? Because it is a lot more to do. We heard last time round from some of our customers that use this approach and what they get from it. But I think, to summarize, that these are the kind of three kind of areas there. Really, that visibility on what your people, where your people are at, really, and looking at their strengths and weaknesses. One of the other things that comes up quite often is the idea that, yes, you have a certificate of competency, your COC, but that is pretty inconsistently awarded. And we've seen some examples, some well-documented examples as well. So it's not leaving it to chance that the pieces of paper someone rocks up with are the full story, as it were, and that there are more to it. And then the other thing I think that is becoming increasingly important, and I was talking about this at Crew Connect last week as well, is that sort of that need to build talent is there now. We're not finding it as often the case that we can just pick the people we need up off the street, as it were. We've got to look at ways of actually building that talent up and sort of doing succession planning, looking across your cohort or your employees, and really kind of helping them to do that. So that career planning aspect of it, Andy, how is sort of a combination of a lot of things, but it's basically preparing one rank for life in the next rank, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and so that's one of the, if you like, one of the biggest and best things that can happen on board ship. But it also applies to office as well. The office environment is exactly the same, and that is where individuals through the competency management system, they actually know what they've got to achieve to get to the next rank. So it's laid out very clearly. So instead of it being guesswork, perhaps, if you're lucky, you get taken under the wing by a good mentor and they guide you and they show you. But if you're unlucky, you get the wrong person and you've got no idea really how you should be preparing yourself and what you should be doing. You sort of perhaps feel that, I should do that. But actually, if you have a competence management system, you have it all outlined. You know the level that you should be performing at to achieve, if you like, your readiness for the next rank. And I think that's one of the things. It does help people, because sometimes people feel that they're ready because they're confident, but actually they haven't got the actual skills to underline, to support that. So they, rather than somebody having to have a tough conversation with them and saying, look, really, you're not ready, actually, they'll know that for themselves. They might still have a tough conversation, but at least they've got the idea, they've got the grounding. They know, well, I haven't done that yet. I need to work on that area.
And it's a good way, I think, of to your point, to actually give people confidence in rank, because we quite often are promoting people at young ages with very expensive assets that they're responsible for. So it's important for their mental health and their levels of stress and so on, that they feel confident and ready and able. And just to give you a picture, it bounces around a little bit, but around, say, 2,500 of the vessels that we work with have the competency management system in place in there. And Nikolai's helped a lot of those people, and we're going to hear a lot from him today about how that's practically applied. But I just want to draw your attention to sort of a bit of data. And this is something, again, to give you some idea of where the payoff comes from putting in something like this in terms of it. Now, what you're looking at here is a slicing and dicing of port state control inspection information around, and this are focused on deficiencies rather than detentions, because blissfully detentions are much rarer, but deficiencies are quite often, and they are can be kind of costly to you in terms of like the reputation with charterers and so on. So what you're looking at there on the grey line, that's like the common sort of market. When you look at the sort of dark blue line, that's people who are using OTGs, ocean learning platform. Okay, so that's like without the competency management system. So there's a big drop there in terms of, the way I look at that is it's because they have a structured way of managing training, they're going to have some sort of advantage there. I'm not saying it's because they're necessarily as well, it's all down to them using our systems. That's obviously not the case. There's all sorts of reasons why these people are top performers, but that's a typical thing. But when we look at the other things that they can use that give them another small advantage as well, and on the left, you can see this is the competency evaluation system. So this is not a competency management system, but it's people who regularly assess their crew. So not just assess them from a recruitment perspective, but assess them sort of on an ongoing basis. And you can see that they get a bit of a bounce there, around 14% lower. But it's the CMS ones that have the biggest drop there. So, and again, those people that run CMS, they tend to be the top operators. So that could be the reason why. But I think what it shows you is that there is we see a definite trend amongst those that employ the use of a CMS on board their vessels over everybody else for whom we can sort of observe the data for. And I think it's the kind of behaviors that the CMS encourages that I think leads to that sort of improved performance. So that's just to kind of set the scene for you in that there is a really strong driver for doing this. It does tend to give you good performance across the board. But there are lots of different ways that you can run competency management systems, and people have done, as Andy said, for a very, very long time. You could do it on paper if you wanted to, but today we're talking about the benefits of a digital CMS and why you would do it digitally. I'm not going to walk you through all these different things, but guys, why would someone basically take a digital route with this and make it sort of like, Nikolai, we haven't heard from you yet. Maybe give us a few ideas of why people are drawn to a digital solution for managing the competency.
Well, the digital solution gives you an immediate and up-to-date overview of the status of your fleet. So at any given moment, you can log into the system, look at the status on average. You could look at your different crew members, look at their progression. So it gives you this high visibility compared to having a record book that they carry on each vessel. They get it stamped on board and carry with them at all times, and you only see it when they're in the office. Whilst when you have it online, you know immediately. You can at any time check it. When you're looking for people to promote in your pool of seafarers, you can use the system to look at it instead of having these notes, these paper-based systems, which is good systems, but they're not as agile as a digital system.
Yeah, I think as well, you mentioned there, it's important that you mentioned as well that this digital stuff, through data exchange, it means that it can follow the seafarer, right? So if they move from one ship to another, they're not having to then start another book somewhere else. Effectively, that's going with them as their sort of progression, right?
Yeah, and they won't lose it. They will never lose it. It's always there. It's backed up. It's following them from vessel to vessel. It's online, available all the time, and it's connected to you. So if you're employed as a cadet and end up as a master, all the records from the period of your employment is available in the system. Yeah. So you know your progression.
And that accountability thing, I think, is interesting as well, because people have got a record. We'll see that in the workflows in a second. You can see exactly who signed off on this proficiency and that sort of stuff, and see patterns and so on.
Where and who and at what time and any comments made. It's all there. All is available. Yeah.
And of course, as well, you can update it if you want to. You can do essential updates, because a CMS should never be a fixed thing. It should always be something that's going on. Yeah, exactly so. And you'll see as well that in a minute, you'll see that there are some automated kind of workflows that help you to manage the process well. I think that's the other thing. So it's probably best to show you by example. So before we get into that, though, what kind of things, what are the sort of components if you like, that typically go into a competency management, Nikolai, in terms of the
there are the most widely used is, as the first one here, is onboard assessment. Is getting assessed by your senior who's knowing the job, who's mentoring you, and assessing you if you're up to the standards. in our system, we can use multiple ways of achieving a competence or proving a competence, checking out the proficiency. You could use our big library of 800 different titles to achieve competences. You can register courses. You can do knowledge tests in CS, both our predefined SSCW test, or you can create your own company-specific test. Recommend that highly for your company SMS, for instance, to verify instead of just checking that I've read the SMS, but if you have questions, you actually verify that I have some knowledge of the SMS. You could use certificates. You can even by the act of serving on board a vessel, you achieve some competence. So you could use time in rank to achieve. Some things might be checked out by me as the trainee. I can check out things myself. That's a self-assessment. You could use CSTs. Basically, any activities that we offer in our system can be used and tailored into this system.
Yeah.
We do it a lot when we engage with new clients for CMS. They typically have some sort of paper-based form, and we look at it, we evaluate it, we talk with them. Sometimes you have procedures in a non-digital system that is already taken care of in your digital system, and you can use this, see how you can progress and use different activities to verify, so that it's an automated process, assigning the right requirements with the right verifications at any given time.
Yeah, good. So it's basically enables you to sort of look and say, what is the best way of, what is the proficiency that we're examining, and what level of detail do we need? What kind of an assessment is required here? Like you said, if it's just like, I want to make sure that someone reads this thing, we can do that. If you want to make sure they understand it, then you would add an assessment. If you want to make sure that they, spend a certain amount of time exposed in a certain vessel, you can do it that. So it's really just looking at the right way, the right activity that demonstrates proficiency, right?
Yes, and you can have basic stuff like introduction to company. That I see that is evolving, and people are using CMS to have this register, that you're properly induced into the company, getting the knowledge. And that makes a lot of sense when you're a new seafarer. But you can use, it's either checked out by you doing these activities, or by the nature of having a service record. If you have been sailing 12 months from the company, maybe you not need a basic introduction anymore, and you're quite known with the company. So there's a lot of combinations that can be made and for obtaining this and monitoring and tracking.
And one thing I forgot, I didn't put any slides on this, but I'll just make the point in case I forget later. There's more than one way of skinning a cat, right? You can also suggest you can do it this way or this way. So depending on how the learner, likes to do it, you've also got that option as well, haven't you?
Yeah, in a single proficiency. I know I get a bit nerdy. I'm a bit detailed oriented with the system, but you can use what is called an OR proficiency. So you could have a proficiency that is the main competence, and it could be checked out either by onboard assessment or a CES or a service record. So you can combine this building up so that you have many ways to skin the cat, and but the result is that you're competent. You're achieving this competence.
Good. So I'm going to zoom in now quickly on just one of the workflow aspects, because Nikolai mentioned that one of the most common things is that onboard assessment. So this is a person assessing another person, and that for me is what takes this into the real world. You haven't got just like your learning happens over here, your work happens over here. This is where you bring the two things together. So I think it's worth us looking at this, and why this then makes it interesting from a sort of software additive point of view. And so what you're looking at here is that kind of assessment workflow, and it starts with the candidate. Okay, so the candidate begins by seeing what it is that they are going to be assessed on, and that's really important. They can look at the requirements of the task or of the proficiency, and effectively familiarize themselves with what that assessment process is going to look like. At that point, they're kind of like putting their hand up, and they're alerting the assessor to say, okay, I'm ready. When you're ready, I'm ready. And the assessor then will pick that up. They'll be able to see, and I'll show you examples of what this looks like in the software in a second, but I just want you to understand the concept first. So the assessor will then look at that, and they'll see that candidate is ready. And they'll familiarize themselves with the proficiency, the task, and the criteria by which the assessment should be done. And that means that they are prepared to understand what it is that they've got to check really with the candidate. They'll then arrange to do that assessment together, and that could be done as part of a routine operation, or they might be, just arranging to do that in a sort of non-realistic setting. Depending on the proficiency, there are different ways you could do it, but they effectively undertake that task together, and the assessor is there present, watching and seeing how that's done, and then the assessor performs the evaluation. So they actually input into the system the whether or not that person has passed and any notes and stuff with it. And then, of course, those records are updated. The crew record is updated. The progress is displayed, and it can then be reported on as an event. So that's kind of like the workflow. Anything you guys want to add into that, or have I set the scene effectively on that one?
You have set the scene very nicely. I know that we're going to look at more on the guidelines and how the candidate is assessing.
Let's have a. I mean, Nikolai, maybe you could talk us through this, because this is an example of the assessment criteria that we might be looking at for a task.
Before Nikolai does that, I just wanted to mention that it may be at this stage, people who aren't familiar with the systems are looking at thinking, "Wow, that's a lot of work," and there is work. I don't want to minimize that, but the fact is that as you become familiar with the system, actually everything speeds up. So those processes at the early stages, you're getting used to the evaluation criteria, for example. But once you've done it a few times, the assessor knows exactly what it is. The process is a lot more smooth, and it doesn't look perhaps as daunting as it does at the moment. But so that was the only thing that I would also mention there is that don't be put off by thinking, there's a lot of steps there, but actually it goes pretty seamlessly once people are familiar with how it works. The whole thing speeds up, and it's a lot smoother in operation.
Yes, they would know that the task, and they would know they would perform it many times. But just take us through what we're looking at here, Nikolai.
Yeah, here we look at a definition of a proficiency in the system. We see it starts with a name, a number, and charts and publications data. That is what we're reviewing here. It is possible to have a proficiency be either critical or non-critical, and the system allows you to filter between those, so you can have 2 levels of requirements. Then comes the important parts here, the really important parts, and especially if you go down the road of creating your own bespoke system, this is where gold is found or the system is lost. It's creating proper guidelines. What is this proficiency about? What is it that the candidate is demonstrating? What is the criteria that we use to evaluate the candidate? Any reference material so that the candidate can view this. So in advance, before they click ready to be assessed, they can have a glance at this, read it, study it. Do I know how to do this? If I don't know, what kind of resources outside of my mentors and my colleagues on board, which is very important, but outside of them, where could I have a glance? So this is Mariner's Handbook, the Guide to Port Entry, all of these publications that is available on board that I could start studying, start looking at, especially if I'm a cadet starting out. This is very important information for me. Also, when I evolve, this is very important information. It also shows me that this what kind of assessment method is here. In this case, on board assessment. And we see here this is already approved, and we see that this has been approved, a date and which installation it was approved. Could have expiration dates so that you regularly have to be re-evaluated for this. So this is how proficiency is entered into the system, and it looks. So guidelines and criteria and references are key elements here. And it's all about removing the face factor, right? So if Andy really likes my handsome face, he would tend to be more positively engaged with me. And if this is just knowing charts and publications data, He could say, oh, well, he knows what a computer is, so he knows this. But if it's detailed, it shows exactly what I need to know, it's very easy for him to evaluate me and see that if I know exactly this, what is required.
And that's it, Nikolai. That's driving that consistency across the fleet. That it's not about whether you get on with the person or not. It's whether they actually are capable and they know what they're supposed to be doing, and then can demonstrate that they do it. That they follow through. So yeah, that consistency is really what we're looking for from the CMS.
Yes.
Good. So yeah, and then in terms of sort of what does that journey look like then for the seafarer? So they would log in. This is our seafarer Olga. She's logging into Ocean Learning Platform, and she's looking at her required tasks. And she can see now the way that these are put together. We'll talk about the standards in a minute, but this example, in this particular example, her company has invested in the Intertanko EICMG, the competency management guidelines that Intertanko put together. And so those exist at this kind of top level. And when she can see what that's all about, what that standard is all, is designed to do and to achieve and all that kind of thing. So it just gives her a bit of familiarization into what it is and why it's important. And then when she goes into it, she can see a number of different groups in there. So different topic areas which are defined in the ICMG standard. And you can see progress on there. So she's just starting out. She'll click into one of those areas and then look at the number of different proficiencies, individual proficiencies that need to be performed. And then she can see, as we've just been looking at there, the criteria for evaluation. So you can see what she's going to be assessed on. So this is a mooring operation. And she'll click that box when she's ready to alert the assessor that it's time to be assessed. Now we go to Chris Gabriel, who's acting as our assessor today. He can see that he has onboard assessment to look at, that the candidate has been ready to assess. He can see her name there, Olga, on the list, and that she's ready. And then, as we said, he can then look at it and see, right, just remind himself of what he's actually got to do by way of this assessment and how he's going to do it. And at this point, they would arrange to do that real world assessment together. So there's a little bit of a break here in terms of what happens next. But once they've performed that task together, he would return here and he would be ready to then complete that assessment. And he could, for example, simply approve it and add a few little notes there. But if he also felt that there was more work to be done, he could disapprove, and he could then write in some notes to be recorded on the record there and suggest some further training. In this particular example here, he's going to say, well, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find something in the training library that will help her to build up her knowledge, and he will schedule that. And then she will see that appear in her requirements schedule. And of course, when Olga logs in, she can see, in this case, she was approved, so it's all good. She can see that has changed the record. She's moved through, having completed some of the mooring requirements from the EICMG standard, and gets a view of her overall kind of pathway to completion in the record there. And likewise, Nikolai mentioned that on the fleet level, they're able to go in there and see, I think this is just, at the vessel level rather than the fleet level, you can see where everybody's at in terms of the overall kind of progress and that kind of thing. So that gives you a bit of an understanding of the walkthrough in terms of that handover between the seafarer and the assessor. Now, I was mentioning the EICMG standard, so I think it's important that we talk a little bit about the standards available, because it's not like there is any hard and firm rules around this, really. It's just about the standard that works best for your company. So the way that we approach this is there's sort of like a number of available standards and competency packs that you can work with. You could alternatively, and some customers don't take any of these. They have their own ones, as Nikolai mentioned, and they'll bring those in. But these ones here you're looking at on the side there, you've got things like Intertanko's EICMG standard, which is a good starting standard. It's around 72, I think it is 72, 73 different proficiencies that need to be kind of mastered in there. So quite manageable across, core kind of areas. Then you've got like the BCAV, the behavioural competency and verification. That's probably, we do a whole session on that in itself, but that's kind of looking at some of those softer skills and being able to evaluate things like leadership, communication, that kind of thing. And then you've got the SIGTO standards there, and I'll come back to those. But essentially, that's where the sort of LNG specialists have said, we've designed a whole set of competencies that we believe will kind of help you to manage the competency of people on gas carriers. And those are there. On the other side, you're seeing things that we've developed, often with customers as well, that address specific trades as well. So there is some overlap in here. And that's where there's that sort of consultancy element of working out what are the best ones that are going to work for you as a company. Gentlemen, any thoughts from you on this slide?
What's important is to note that you can combine that. You can have any number of competency system active for the same person. It's different folders if you dumb it down on the system level. Where you can place requirements, and they can all be assigned to hit the right target group. What's also important to note is you don't have to start with the whole shebang. You don't have to go implement 500 competences. In fact, sometimes that's not the best thing to do. You can start out slowly. You can start out, you can select items from these elements. You could create your own complete system from the bottom up. It's a catalog of opportunities.
We'll come to sort of how you go through that process on the next sort of slide. But I think the important takeaway for me here is that you don't have to write all of those guidelines and everything necessarily yourself, right? There are routes to it. There are people who've already done the job. So if, for example, I was talking on stage at CrewConnect last week with one of our customers who's a LNG carrier, their tastemakers, the people that care, the charterers, etc., are behind the SIGTO standards. You know, they are happy with those. So it's a very easy choice for them. They implemented the SIGTO competency standards, which are very comprehensive, and that's it. Done, job done. So they didn't have to write any of them. They needed to obviously understand them and see and make sure they were right fit for them. But ultimately that was a plug and play situation. Whereas others, you might have mixed fleets, you might have particular charterers requirements that you need to think about. There may be other things at play here, and we'll get into that, I think, in a little bit. But the important thing is to say there are options and there are quick routes to doing some of this. But I think the point that you made as well, Nikolai, is a really, really good one. You know, start small, otherwise, and see the benefits, and then you've got everyone's buy-in to move forward on it. So when you design a CMS, just in the interest of time, I think we're doing all right at the moment. Talk us through it. When making that choice between customized and generic, Nikolai, what does this process typically look like?
Well, you have to first create a mission statement, I would say. What is it that you're trying to achieve? To go back to your customer going for SIGTO, they try to achieve a compliance system that would be appreciated by their customers. Then the selection was easy. It's SIGTO because that's a widely approved standard. But you have to define what is the purpose for you. What do you want to try to achieve? Which tasks are in the systems? Who is going to assess? Who is going to be mentors? Who is going to be the targeted audience? You don't have to implement the system for all your ranks. You could do it for only your cadets. That's a quite typical starting point. Start with the cadets and ratings, mapping it out. So what is it that you're trying to achieve? The timelines that you set up. What are the tasks needed? You need to train your users. You need to, or your crew. You need to train the assessors so that they know how to act as an assessor. There is an IMO model course available for that. And then you start, once you have scoped out what is the requirements, what is it that you want to achieve, who are the actors in the system, then you start designing the competences, all of these guidelines, criteria that we looked what a proficiency is achieved by, and all of the what kind of activity type is it that it's checking out. Do you need onboard assessment, does it need to be that all the time, or can it be achieved by time in rank? So it's a whole lot of different factors that you take into account. And then you do go into operational level, where you have the pre-designed system that you made, and you implement it, and then you start to assess competences across your fleet. You have it operational for a while, typically a year. Then you do some gap analysis. Where are we at the moment? Are we achieving the targets that we defined in scoping? Do we need to adapt? Do we need to adjust our system? Is it the right fit for us? You need to keep this alive. A competence system that's not alive is not optimum, because there are new challenges entering the market. We see new fuels arising. We see new needs for new competences. What is happening with my fleet? What kind of vessels do I have? What is the equipment on board? Am I covering it correctly? It's a continuous process.
Yeah, I think the implementation one as well. I think that's that you can actually use the competency management system and the learning platform to actually help you with the implementation as well. So you mentioned there, for example, one of the key things in here is the onboard trainer and assessor. You know, that's a really important role. So we have e-learning resources for that. So you might put that out as a starting point on there. You might want to put a small competency management folder, as you put it, in place, which takes people through the whys and the wherefores of what it is they're trying to achieve. And then before you start going live with your competency management system, everyone knows why you're doing it, what you're doing it. That whole sort of change management piece can be taken care of as well. So it's a symbiotic thing with the sort of learning strategy more broadly.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on that. Sorry, Nikolai, interrupting there. But that whole idea of having a clear purpose is so important, because otherwise the people on board think, oh, here we go, it's another thing that's been imposed from shore. Those people don't know what we do, that we've got enough to do already. Why are we having to do this? I know my people, I know whether they go or not. And so it's really important that when you do design the system, that you do sell the benefits and you do sell that process, because otherwise, you know, it just turns into another job. It doesn't get the buy-in. It's not being completed properly. You know, people aren't really seeing the value, and it's as much a sort of part of the process that you have to think about is encouraging and persuading people that it really is a valuable tool for them, because all the while they're not using it, they can just see it as another job. Once they start using it, you know, they want to actually feel that, I can see the benefits. I can see how this is improving situation on board. And that encourages them to carry on and to keep using it.
But this is a key thing as well. I think, though, that the CMS actually has the answer to its own problem there, because I gave the example of SIGTO and I mentioned sort of charterage requirements, but equally the customer was keen to actually use this as a way of showing their investment in their people, to actually demonstrate to the people that they were building their careers and their strengths, their proficiencies. And that's one of the things that the SIGTO standard does. It makes it very clear there are different pathways, you know, from a rank perspective. So people can see that what they're doing is not only aligned to achieving company objectives, it's also aligned to building them up as a professional and helping them to progress, you know. So in a sense, it's a sort of virtuous circle, I think. And in fact, I've actually got a slide of the virtuous circle. I should have put it in. There you go. Something to continuous improvement. I'll get it right next time. So if we go to so the generic solution. So this really is pretty much what we've been talking about. But this is where you're looking at, you know, you're picking up relevant industry information. You're looking at things like SDCW, SOLAS. You're looking at those kind of, you know, maybe TMSA, whatever. You're looking at sort of things that are out there in the public domain, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to pick that one for me. You know, in other words, someone's done the really good job of mapping out gas competencies. I want to just be a really good gas operator. That makes sense for me to do that and to then have that and be able to evidence that I follow those rules. And that's a pretty simple kind of approach. Essentially, it's one we've been talking about. But there is another approach as well, which is much more complex. And that's, we've also really just been talking about this as well, I think, in as we've been going. And that's really looking a little bit deeper. So you might be looking again at all that stuff that's out there in the public domain, all the, you know, register best practice guidance, all that sort of stuff. But you also look about what's typical to your company, And you mentioned there the sort of the mission side of it, what it is you're trying to achieve. But you can also look at the kinds of accidents and incidents. I showed you the PSC data, for example, there. We quite often see when we mine that through with customers, they're quite often surprised by some of the areas that they're getting hurt by, and it helps them to look at where they can adjust their training schedule, training strategies and stuff around there. So it might be your audits that you've done as well. It might be stuff coming through from inspections and procedures, your company KPIs and things you want to achieve. And that's really where this sort of customized approach comes in. And you might want to blend some of those industry standards and off the peg things and start to put them together. Nikolai, just out of interest, taking a sort of a broad brush through all the customers you've worked with, of the two sort of approaches, what would you say is the most common that you find?
Oh, both are common and relevant, but I see the ones. My impression is that the most successful ones are the ones that are building their own system. They're generating the bespoke system. The challenge here is not adding complexity, but keeping it simple, keeping it concentrated. We see. I always like to look at the airline industry because I feel they are a bit ahead on the curve, and then comes maritime, and then the rest of the world follows when it comes to training and competence of their active personnel. And you see the airline industry, they started to see a lot of human errors, a lot of accidents and near misses, and they built the checklist before takeoff, and that worked like a charm. But they kept adding, because this is nice, this is nice, this is nice, this is nice. Here we have some issues. And then they saw that instead of going down, the accidents started to rise exponentially. And it is quite obvious and simple. It's when everything is important, nothing is important. So they have now returned and condensed it down to a single A5 where they have the checklist of the most important elements. So don't be afraid of don't create a mountain when you start out with a bespoke system.
Yeah.
Create it gradually, drop by drop. We know, as we talked, it's a busy day on board. They have their tasks. If they get 1,000 proficiencies turned on their head, they're going to be, wow, we can't handle this. But if you give them 1, if you give them 2, every quarter you might realize it. So
yeah,
it's
but also as well, I think the other thing is to say is that there's a lot of good things that happen in terms of proficiency and competency building on board a ship. And the other inverse way of looking at it is if you're not recording it, measuring it, and getting it down, you're also doing a disservice to those people in terms of being able to kind of understand and know where they are. So it's trying to achieve that balance, I think. But in the interest of time, I think, because I'd like to get into questions, I'm sure there are going to be people who want to kind of challenge us on some of these points or find out a little bit more. So I just want to kind of summarize some of the things that we talked about today here. So I think this competency management is taking it to the pinnacle, right? There's plenty of people who are just doing things like digital learning, onshore training, whatever, but managing your competency stuff, this is really kind of up there, and you see it. That's why you see it documented and referenced in so many of the strong industry drivers. I think it appears in TMSA about how many times, Andy? We did a little assessment, didn't we?
Yeah, it's over 30. It's peppered all the way through, and now as well with dry BMS. So we talked about the different ship types. Perhaps in the past it was driven by the gas and the tanker industry, but now the dry bulk side has picked this up as well, as recognizing, as you said at the very beginning there, what a strong driver it is towards safety and operational efficiency. And so now you'll find, if you look through the dry BMS standard, it's mentioned pretty much everywhere. I mean, there's 30 elements, and in every one virtually a competency, either the competencies of the individual or the competence of a system to record the competencies is mentioned. So it's becoming more and more widespread.
Yeah, Yeah, and I think OCIMF as well worth mentioning. You know, with their working with Intertanko on the behavioural competencies.
Yeah,
you know, they reference it and they talk about it in terms of actually being integral to building a culture within the company as well.
yeah,
and
that's the other element. You mentioned it before, and you showed it in your very nice diagram there about the BCAV, for example, just an example of behavioural side of things. So at the early stage of your career, a lot of the focus is on the technical, being able to do things, you know. But as you progress, as you become more senior, the way that you do that, the behaviours that you exhibit become so much more important, and that's where a blend of systems might become appropriate for you. As Nikolai was saying there, you know, you can pick, all right, I'm really going to focus on leadership, or I'm really going to focus on communication, and then you introduce a behavioural competency in. So it's really important to, again, it comes back to what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to do? If you're driving safety and operational performance, finding the right elements to your competency management system so that you really focus on the bits which will make that change.
Yeah. And then the other thing is to say, we hear a lot in our industry a lot of the time about like the need for mentoring, the need for that kind of, you know, close kind of work between people on board. And this for me is one of the areas that gets a bit overlooked sometimes with competency management. What you've seen in that workflow is like sort of a I don't know, it's creating a system where that has to happen. That has to, you have to put those two people together. That person has to be walking through with the assessor and the assessee. There has to be that exchange between them. And as I said, it's captured and recorded, so you can see and people who are investing and those kind of people who do that job well can get seen as well. So I think that's really important, as well as the accountability bit. You know, I've heard so many stories over the years that particularly on the trainee, the cadet record books, Nikolai, that's one that always breaks my heart, where when you talk to cadets and people just haven't been taking that seriously. They've just been, oh, give me a book, and they sign it, you know, and that kind of thing. And this eliminates that because it's getting that level of detail and so on into the assessment. Also, as well, like in terms of being a high quality operator, I think this is becoming. We talked about that in the sort of, you know, the standards and who's adopting these standards, who's referencing these standards. But certainly, anecdotally, you know, when I talk to people, when they want to get those better charters, when they want to get those longer term, more secure, higher quality charters, this is a real cornerstone of that, being able to go in there and give that customer the confidence that you're running a really, really tight ship. I mean, Andy, you work for Shell for years. I mean, give us a bit of an idea. I mean, that was a while ago now, but they were just as keen on it in those days, right?
No, and it covers so many of the bases that you mentioned there, in terms of the career development for the individuals and so on. Part of the reason it was done, why the competency management system was so important, was to identify people while they're on board, so that you were growing your own capability, if you like, because a lot of the time you wanted those people to come to shore, and you wanted the best people to come to shore, you know. So you wanted the people that not only had good technical skills, but exhibited all the right behaviors, knew how to lead, knew how to communicate. So it led into, if you like, again, coming back to your virtuous circle, you know, you give people a very clear idea of what they need to do. You measure them against it. You find out who are the best performers. You bring those people into your shore, and they've got those values. Then they know that this is how I developed, and they, you know, encourage other people to use the same process. So yeah, very, very important.
Good. And then the last point, as you might expect, you know, why us? Why work with us on this? And I think, you know, I'd say because the data shows that there is a clear advantage to doing that. We have the biggest collection of those standards and worked with and to develop some of those standards, and we had a hand in that too. So we really understand what's required in this space. And then thirdly, it's the other things that are around it that then support that CMS as well. So the training library, if you look at the SIGTO one, for example, we have a piece of e-learning that maps directly to every single proficiency. So not only have you got the way of tracking all of those proficiencies, but you've also got a ready-made asset that connects directly into that. And there's many other examples of training. Like I mentioned there, we've got the onboard and a trainer and assessor course to back you up there. So I don't think there's anybody that could be in better hands with as far as that goes. But I can't see any questions. So we've either done a really, really good job or everyone's gone to sleep. Are there any questions? I can't see any, James. Can you?
No, we have no questions.
The Q&A only. No.
This is the first, actually, for us on a webinar.
First time. We must have done an incredible job. But I mean, please do pop some questions in if you have them, or you can get in touch with us afterwards. You might be thinking, well, okay, this is sort of interesting. What kind of happens next if I am interested? And I think typically it would go like this. If a customer someone is interested in taking on competency management, obviously a practical software demonstration. We avoided doing that today just because it can get a little bit sort of too involved and a bit overwhelming in terms of what's going on. So it's easier to do that and to talk through one-to-one, make sure we're keeping everyone with us. Meeting to discuss your competency ambitions. That's exactly it. Who do you want to please? What problems do you want to solve within the business? How maybe you've got a particular growth challenge or a particular area that you want to work on. That's really important. Looking at the available competency frameworks, that gives you a bit of the ability to sort of see what might be a good fit for you and what we could recommend for you there. And then there's those bespoke competency requirements or consulting ones. And that could be like if there was nothing available off the shelf and you needed something that was going to address something very, very specific, you weren't able to do that yourself. We might be able to help you in terms of putting that together. But all of that, you might think, well, that's kind of a bit of a commitment. The other alternative is just have a 10-minute coffee chat. Let us know. We can just kick a few ideas around and see whether that's something that you want to progress as a conversation. But that really is everything from us today. So unless there are any questions, I think we can start to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think one of the things perhaps, Raul, is that if you like, certain people within organisation will understand why the CMS is helpful, why it's a valuable tool, but they often have to persuade other people that really is the case. So I think part of the thought process of going around competency management systems needs to be that sort of conversation as well about, well, how do I persuade people that this is the right thing to do? And we've covered a lot of it today. It's very interesting to see that port state control data and to see how it improves as you go through and implement training programs and then competency management system programs. And that's a very powerful driver. But a lot of the other benefits aren't covered. Port state control is only one snapshot, as you say. We don't have that sort of broad range of information from companies about how their safety is improved or their incident reporting is improved or whatever. So it's very important that we understand the drivers and why people want to do it and give them the ammunition, if you like, to explain to other people, well, these are the benefits. This is what really happens when you implement the system.
Yeah, and to that end, I think that's where the case studies and the sort of guidance documents, James shared a link in there. Again, I could have put a slide up on this, but we do have a guide that gets, for people to download and have a look at and read through and see our sort of our guide to how to approach the task of thinking about getting this off the ground. But also case studies are a good way of, like, if this is something that you need to sell up to hire in your organization. I quite often find that is the case where training managers or crewing professionals see they see the real benefits, but they have trouble getting the commitment from upstairs. And that is something that we can certainly help with and give them some resources that they can use to make their case. Just as we can when people are implementing stuff. This is another thing that we perhaps don't do a good enough job of talking about. But when it comes to crew seminars and things like that, we also, if we're invited, we often participate in the crewing seminar to actually help and explain to the crew. But we can also provide resources for people to use at their crew seminars onto how, to get sort of drive seafarer adoption and of things like the mobile app, and actually sort of, getting on board perhaps with understanding what this means for them and where it adds value for them and can help them with their careers. So these are all really important aspects, I think, that we shouldn't overlook. And maybe that, again, in the spirit of continuous improvement, maybe put that slide in the deck for next time round as well, like how to make it land kind of thing.
Yeah. The other thing is really, you mentioned it again earlier on about being seen as a quality operator, being seen as the best companies. They have these systems, they are in place. So it's about moving beyond that sort of compliance level. Yeah, everyone's got an STCW certificate. Everyone is in theory competent. How do you actually demonstrate that? And how do you, give customers confidence that your people really are capable? So yeah, it's a combination of all those things. Obviously, safe performance, efficient performance, that's really vital because that underscores everything that you do. Mm-hmm. But then if you've got this program that shows both to the seafarer, to the people on shore, there's a proper development system for you within this company. It helps people to feel invested and to do their best. That's again, another really important part of it.
Yeah, and in fact, that was one of the things that came up last week when I was running through this case study, that this is a way of demonstrating yourself as an employer of choice, someone who takes their staff's development seriously and has a good record of a structured approach that they can talk through prospective joiners about what they can expect when they arrive. So I think that again is another strong driver, particularly when good crew and good, well-trained and skilled crew are becoming an increasingly rare commodity. So I think there's the two aspects. One, you want to make sure you keep the people that you have, keep them motivated, keep them engaged. But also B, you have to accept that perhaps you're not going to get everyone walking up the gangway ready to go, and you're going to need to put together a system in place that's going to allow them to build those proficiencies quickly and make them as useful as they can be to you as quickly as possible. So, yeah, another two important drivers. So, well, look, it's getting close to the end now. So I just really want to thank you, Andy, for participating today and sharing your knowledge, and Nikolai for your expert insights into how we kind of build and put these systems together, and of course James for organizing this and doing all of the hard work in the background to ensure that people know about these events and sign up for them. So as I said, if there are any questions that you want to get in touch with us, I think we've got details where we can find us, and we're happy to answer those questions. Recording will be made available, James, is that right?
Yes, that's right. I'll send everybody an email with a link to the recording afterwards.
Yeah. And if you haven't already, please make sure that you sign up to the mailing list, and we'll make sure that we alert you to other topics in the future as well. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye. Bye, everybody.